So, this happened 2 days ago. I, a 25-year-old female, was on a date with a girl. Let's call her Lex. The date was going super well. We've been talking for the better part of a year. Her co-worker invited us and a roommate, let's call him Kyle, to a party. It went super well. We had a blast. And on our way back, he drove in front of us while we took her motorcycle back and followed him. This is where it all goes wrong. He randomly turned into a parking lot, so we followed him, and it turns out he was passed out in a driver's seat. We did not realize he was this drunk. Lex tried to wake him up, and when he got out of the car, he just started beating the shit out of her. So, I ran over and pulled him off of her and started beating him. I put up a good fight until he took me to the ground and started strangling me. Then grabbed me by the hair and started bashing my face into the pavement repeatedly. Also, this guy is 6'2" and I'm 5'3". I started to fight back even harder to get him to stop because I thought he was going to kill me. So I clocked him really hard and he stood up, bleeding all over me, and said, "I'm going to fucking kill you." At this point, Lex picked me up from the ground and just screamed, "Run!" So, we ran in opposite directions into the woods, and he followed me. I was much faster, so I was hiding in the woods while he walked around going, "Oh, Gabby." Fake name, by the way. Come out, wherever you are. I'm gonna fucking kill you." So I wound up army crawling through the woods so he couldn't see me and hiding there until I couldn't hear him anymore. Lex had run the opposite direction, so she wound up by the road and flagged down a rando to call the cops. And they came around and found me hiding in the woods. He broke her jaw and may have fractured my skull. I'm still waiting on the CT results. So yeah, there you have it. Hands down the most terrifying thing I've ever been through. Update. He did not fracture my skull. Thank God. CT came back clean. I'm just concussed. She, on the other hand, will most likely have to get surgery for her broken jaw. Thank you all for your kind comments. So, my best friend and I try to go camping once a year. We've been doing this since we were 13 years old, and have never really been scared or had anything weird happen until last year in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We showed up during peak season the first night, and space was very limited. We were losing daylight, so we set up camp on a spot on the side of the mountain that turned out to be an absolute wind tunnel. Morning came, and we went into town, drank some beers, and messed around until late afternoon. By the time we got back to the mountains to switch our camping spot, we were losing light again, but managed to find a more remote area. We got our tents set up, started a fire, and began drinking again. Time went by, and around 1 a.m., we noticed a flashlight aimed at us. It started walking in our direction, and at first, we didn't think much of it. We assumed it was likely a park ranger coming to fuss at us about something, because who else walks up on you in a remote part of the mountains at 1 a.m.? I don't know about you, but since I started camping, I've learned it's kind of an unspoken rule that you don't walk up on someone camping that late at night, unless it's an emergency. Anyway, the person gets close enough, and we realize it's just some guy, probably in his early 50s, wearing a shirt and basketball shorts. His girlfriend, who looked to be in her 40s, was with him, avoiding eye contact. The guy immediately starts forcing a conversation about nothing, doesn't acknowledge the time, and completely ignores his girlfriend. His eyes were darting all over the place while we're talking to him about random stuff, like the model of our lantern and how cool it was. He was saying weird things, like how he used to be in law enforcement, completely out of context with the conversation he started. Suddenly, he happens to shine his flashlight on our tents and says, "Oh, that's where you guys are sleeping, huh? Cool setup." The way his eyes and flashlight were moving gave us both the feeling he was trying to see how many of us there were and what we had with us. His eyes and flashlight kept scanning the ground around us. We were getting sized up. For what? I don't know. Once the guy saw everything around us, he paused for a minute, ended the conversation, and walked off into the woods. As soon as his flashlight disappeared, my friend and I looked at each other. Without me saying anything, he said, "We're packing our shit and getting out of here." And so, we did. This was the most unsettling thing I've ever experienced while camping. I think that guy was planning to wait until we were asleep and come back. I don't know what for, but I do know we were 100% getting sized up that night. It might not seem like much, but if you've ever had a moment with another human being where you felt like you were being sized up, you'll know what I'm talking about. I arrived at our family beach condo the night before everyone else was supposed to show up. I was a bit concerned because the balcony door didn't lock properly. The only thing securing it was a small metal hook in a ring on the door frame. At the time, I wasn't too worried since the condo was on the second floor, sandwiched between other units. It seemed highly unlikely that anyone would try to scale the building to reach my balcony. That night, I went to bed, but was awoken around 3 a.m. At first, I thought there was an emergency because I heard alarms, but they quickly faded. I later realized this was part of my dream. I then heard someone banging on the door next to my condo. When I wake up, I'm usually in a zombie state and can't think clearly. Groggily, I began to drag myself out of bed and walk toward the door. In my half-asleep state, I thought it might be my family, even though they weren't supposed to arrive until the next day. Then I noticed the deadbolt wasn't locked. That's when it hit me. My family knew the door code and wouldn't need me to open the door for them. I started to panic. I quickly secured the deadbolt and moved 2 chairs near the balcony door, just in case someone tried to kick it down. The person kept banging on my neighbor's door for about 7 minutes, not wanting to get in trouble with my family, and since I hadn't heard any threats, attempts to pick the lock, or anyone trying to break in, I decided to call the non-emergency number. Unfortunately, I accidentally called the wrong county. I blame my groggy zombie state. I was transferred between 3 different police lines before they eventually hung up on me. I called back, this time reaching the correct county, and they dispatched an officer to investigate. By the time I made the second call, the person had stopped banging on the door. The officer arrived about 30 minutes later. I explained the situation to him, but by then, the perpetrator was long gone. The officer said he would check the area and then leave. I also mentioned that I had been transferred multiple times and then hung up on, to which he sarcastically replied, "Very nice of them," and noted that this kind of thing was typical with the local operators. The next day my family arrived, and I explained the situation to them, but they didn't believe me. Later on, I ran into the neighbor whose door the person had been banging on. I asked him about the incident, and he confirmed what had happened, which helped convince my skeptical family. He said he had been woken up by the banging and had gone to investigate but couldn't see through the peephole because the second unlocked wooden screen door was closed and it was too dark to see outside. He grabbed a knife and repeatedly asked, "Who's there?" but got no response. The person continued banging for 7 minutes before disappearing. We never found out who it was or why they did it. It might have been as simple as a drunk person mistaking the room and leaving after realizing their mistake. But the fact that they didn't respond when questioned and then left without a word was unsettling. Fortunately, there were no further incidents. I'm a 21-year-old guy living in an area with moderate crime. About a week ago, I was walking to my car, getting ready to drive to my girlfriend's house. This guy, who was a decent distance away, yelled at me, asking for a cigarette. I shouted back, "Nah," and continued walking to my car at a brisk pace. However, at this point, he started running up to me. He complimented my car and asked how old I was. I told him I was 21 as I was getting into my car and starting it. He kept trying to make conversation, and then asked if I could go to the corner store to grab him some cigarettes. I said no, and gave him $3, hoping he'd leave me alone, but he didn't. Then he asked if I did any drugs. I told him no, and he mentioned he was trying to get away from that stuff. I was like, "That's cool, bro." He told me he was trying to get away from people from the hood. For context, I'm a scrawny white guy, 6 feet tall, with an average build. Then he told me his name and asked for my social media and such. I declined, but then he asked for my phone number. In the heat of the moment, I made the mistake of giving it to him, something I now regret. Maybe he's just trying to be friendly, but this guy gives me the creeps. Later that night, he texted me, and I didn't respond. Then he texted me again from a different number, and I ignored that too. 5 days later, I ran into him again when I came home late at night. He ran up to me, asking why I hadn't responded. I told him it must have been a glitch or something. He kept talking about jobs, and mentioned again that he wanted to be my friend. I was obviously nervous and apprehensive. He kept asking to hang out, and I gave vague answers ranging from "maybe, I don't know" to "I'm busy." In reality, I'm not that busy. I don't work many hours, and I usually hang out with my girlfriend at my apartment every afternoon. He's probably noticed that my car is in the lot most days. I told him I couldn't hang out in the afternoons because I was busy. He might have good intentions, and is just trying to make friends, but I feel like he's way too forward. The next day, yesterday, he FaceTimed me 6 times in total from both of his numbers. He texted me today as well, and tried calling me on FaceTime again. I let all the calls ring until they stopped. I'm pretty set on not wanting to be his friend, but since he lives nearby, I'm not sure how things will pan out if I tell him directly.